Welcome back to working on the Plymouth. And something that's been bothering me is how faded the rear taillights are. Previous episode I tried to use some plastic polish, but they're just too far gone. Now the good news is I have a new old stock pair on their way, so these are going to get replaced. But I figured these are hard to find. People wanted like $500 for a set of these, and I'm like, not doing that, sorry. Not paying $500 for a set of plastic lenses, and there's no reproductions either. And I was looking around online, like, what can you do to revitalize these guys? And there's this weird stuff from Japan. I'm not saying it's weird, but the packaging has a sort of peculiar shape to it, and it is a translucent ruby red spray. So I'm going to take these off, and it's easy because it just requires taking these two screws out of this chrome. And then I'm going to use some very, very fine steel wool to clean this up, and then like clean it repeatedly with alcohol and stuff to make sure that we get all the crap off of it. And then it'll be time to give this stuff a whirl. It's not going to hurt anything, and if it works out, I can use it on my trunk emblem too. So we'll see. I'm not sure what any of that crap says. Maybe use Google Lens to see if it can translate it. Well, I tried to use Google Translate to translate what the instructions said, and it was like such a bad job of translating. I was just like, well, I'll use common sense. So I used quadruple zero steel wool to really buff out, you know, any imperfections, and also make a little bit of the surface for the adhesive, whatever this is, to stick to. And also I used rubbing alcohol and some cleaners to make sure I got all the wax off. So there's not much of this at all. Good thing these are small taillights, and I'm still like hesitant. I'm not sure if you're supposed to rattle this. It seems like if it's a clear spray you wouldn't want to. I'm gonna mix it for a little bit, and I'm not gonna film spraying this because this is, unlike most of my radios that I've spray paint, this is gonna be way more tedious. I thought I was filming and I was just talking to myself. All right, I did spray these yesterday. I know it doesn't look like it because I've since come out and gotten the steel wool and sanded these down again, because what happened is at the finish, the spray went down to the cracks and you could see it very clearly. And granted, I get a feeling it's never going to be perfect. It's always going to look kind of funny because there are big cracks that are in the finish. Or not in the finish, but in the plastic itself. These are going to be sacrificial lights anyway. The new old stock ones are on their way. And it takes just a few minutes to get these off. So I'm going to take a look at the new ones when they get in here. I may or may not put them on when the car is sitting outside, because the California sun will destroy them. But at least I'll have these, which can be my sacrificial lights to be outside. So I think I'm going to sand these down just a little bit more because I want that finish to have gotten into those cracks. And again, I don't think it's going to look perfect when I'm done. It's probably going to definitely be obvious that these are old lights, which they are. But at least it'll look red versus that faded chalky white they were. Welcome back to Day Whatever, working on the Plymouth. And drastic change of plans. So after spending a lot of time and headache on the generator / mechanical regulator thingy, we could not get it to work right. I could not get it to work right. Everyone online who's on the forums that has these cars like, just do yourself a favor, go with the one-wire alternator. So that's what I got. There's a company out of Kansas that builds these. Literally made in USA. It must be a very small company, but they do a good job. And this is a 6-volt positive ground one-wire alternator. And what I'm going to do is remove the generator. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to hold on to the old generator and remove it and put the alternator in. And then what will happen is the output of the generator will go to the battery connection on the regulator. And so I'm going to take this off. And also there's a part of this kit that I got that has, where is it? I should have gotten this out before I started filming. You can also make a custom bracket. So I'll have to see how that works. I think it'll be easier once I get the old generator out. I can probably have to take that bracket off that's on the car. Then I'll make up this bracket to match that one. I've got the instructions. So here we go. I'm going to have to jack the car up again too. Okay, so I made up the bracket for the new alternator. It's kind of funky looking, but I think it'll work. I hope so. This seems like this is maxed out as far as it'll go, and this I'm hoping will fit, but we'll find out real soon. Well, it didn't quite fit. It's off by a hair. Like I tried to even tap this, and it's just a smidgen too tight. So I'm gonna get my grinder and I'm just gonna very carefully shave off a little bit. Just a little bit of a time, and I'll go keep on checking to see if I can get this to fit. And once it fits, then I can bolt the alternator to it, and hopefully it'll line up with the belt. We'll see. I noticed this thing says there's no guarantee that it'll fit. Nice. Well, I didn't film all of the frustration that came with this, but anyway, the way it works is you have to adjust your bracket. You have to kind of like play with it until you can get it to line up with get your pulleys to line up. And anyway, what we need to do now, I say we, it's only me here, is run a wire from here to the battery connection on the regulator, which is down here somewhere. And then we can back the Subaru out of the garage and see if this thing's actually gonna do anything. I sure hope it does, because I've had nothing but problems with the electrical system in this car. All right, well, I went to the grocery store, and it seems like it's doing fine. Maybe I'm just imagining things, but it seems like it's actually running better. But it's putting out at idle, I'm measuring, I don't know, 6.7 volts. I didn't think to test it with giving it any sort of RPMs or anything like that, but still, that's a pretty decent improvement. And what I did too, I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna just go ahead and put this thing to the test. So I turned on all the lights and the fans and everything, and granted, that's probably not a ton, but still, lights on all the way to the grocery store and back, and it cranked very happily, you know, each time. So we'll see. I'm going to take it to the museum tomorrow, and I'm going to have someone confirm that this is right. Sorry, my very loud cat is in here. Pickles? Oh well. To be resumed tomorrow. I'm totally filming this episode backwards. Actually, not backwards, just kind of in a stupid way. So the answer is yes, the alternator is working pretty well, real well. Getting good stiff voltage out of there. It's charging the battery. I can run on my lights. The horn works, everything. But the radio doesn't work. And I'm actually at the radio museum right now, and I promise that when I get home, I'll start the engine. You guys can watch the alternator. And I also need to film driving the car, because it's kind of a hoot. But what I'm going to do, since I'm at the radio museum, is remove the radio, because I just realized we have a whole bunch of vibrator supplies, like new old stock vibrator supplies. And yes, I know it's a stupid sounding name, but that is what converts the 6 volts that feeds in and uses to 6 volts for the tube filaments, and then generates probably anywhere from 45 to 90 volts DC for the power supply for the radio, your B plus supply. So I think you pull these 4 screws in the corners. Let me look underneath for wiring, and then I'll see if I can pull the whole thing. Well, sure enough, it was just 4 screws that was required to pull the radio chassis. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it up on 6 volt power supply. It's obviously been subject to a lot of moisture. This is the vibrator unit here. I'm guessing Philco must have made this for Plymouth. So I'm seeing a lot of Philco parts in here. All Philco tubes. Alright, let's try it out. I don't see any pilot lights. no tube filaments either. And I would have, that's not vibrating. Maybe I don't have it turned on. Didn't get much done there at the museum. It's always really distracting, so I brought the radio home with me. And yesterday I didn't show it, but I was able to bring it up on 6 volts. And the conclusion is that the switch here probably has a dirty contact. In fact, the whole chassis looks just really filthy. It needs to be cleaned up. I was able to get the tube filaments and also really important, the vibrator supply to work. And if you're not sure what that is, it's a kind of an ingenious product. So we all know about modern inverters where you can plug in 12 volt battery and get 120 volts out. And that's using, I'm not an engineer, but I believe it's using a switching diode setup. And prior to a solid state solution, you'd have something like this. And inside of there is a big relay that is going to open and close, I believe, around 60 times a second. So they call them a vibrator because they sit there and they'll buzz. So it's like, buzz. That's what it sounds like. And that provides the B+, which is the high voltage stuff for the B+ power supply of the set. The filaments, obviously, they come from the battery. And I pulled the schematic on this, and what's interesting is that there's a separate connection for the pilot lamps, and then there's another connection for the radio. So I'm not sure why they did that. Maybe they didn't want the pilot lights to get brighter and darker depending on whether the generator was running or not, because the generator in this car wouldn't generate anything unless you were past a certain RPM. It looks like that the decorative chrome front comes off. It looks like you have to remove the knobs. I'd rather do that because I'm probably putting unnecessary strain on these control shafts. But that's neither here nor there. I need to finish another project before I get to this one. I did get some extra tubes because I don't have these tubes necessarily in my collection. 6C4, 6AQ5, which is our output tubes. I got an extra rectifier, which is 6X4. And then there was a 6AV6, which is the triode. So there's more shit to go wrong, so I figured I'd grab one of those. And, oh yeah, the important part is about these guys. And I'm trying to remember, I need to make sure I mention this because there's some people that are watching this that probably don't realize that I work on radios. Mostly I work on antique radios and not cars. And what I'm going to need to do here, a couple of important things. The capacitors associated with this, especially this transformer here, are very high voltage, around 1600 volts. And the reason is because they're getting the full brunt of that. When you have a relay that's opening and closing that many times, you're going to create a tremendous static charge. Even though people would say, well, that doesn't make any sense. This is a 6-volt set. How could that possibly be? Well, trust me, this capacitor is shot. So I found this one. This is rated for 3500 volts, so it's overkill. This can right here, this aluminum thing, this has several electrolytic capacitors inside. And I don't have the individual, I don't have a can that has those values in it. So what you do is you want to replace the values individually with these guys. These are individual electrolytic capacitors. And I've already removed the bottom here so we can kind of see what's going to need to happen. And the bottoms of the electrolytics are right here. You see these 4 lugs? Those are the leads. And we're going to replace each one of those individually with replacement electrolytics. And it's really tight. The good news is it looks like that chassis is ground, so we can mount our electrolytics anywhere we want, as long as it's touching that. And these little bumblebee caps, these are no good either, especially in environments where there's any kind of dampness. If they get any cracks or anything, it's very easy for moisture to get into them and then ruin the foil and make them short. So let me take this front off and then probably set this aside as I fix this enormous German radio that is awaiting my attention. Okay, so first things first, I took it outside. I got out the leaf blower and blew all the dust, well, the dust that I could blow out, the loose stuff. And I've realized there's a gigantic tear in the speaker. That speaker looks kind of roached anyway, so I'm going to see if I need to pull it out so I can see if I can repair the tear. I'm also going to plug it up and see if it actually A, works, and B, if it sounds good. If not, we have plenty of vintage 6x9 speakers over at the museum that I volunteer at. I'm not familiar with how to extract it. It looks like what you do is you pull these bolts on either side, and I think that also has the pilot lights attached. But it'd be good if I can get that off anyway, because I really need to get in here and clean these contacts the best I can. Well, I've gotten started on it, and yeah, this is a little more of a challenge than your typical home radio. Again, because everything needs to be really heavily shielded, because you're in a steel car that moves. So it's tight. This is one of the 4 electrolytics that I'm replacing. What I do is I'll remove, well, in this case, since I have so little room to work with, and my leads are going to have to stay short, I desoldered the leads from the first lug here. Then I cut the old lug off because I'm probably going to mount the negative of the replacement electrolytic there on that lug. So here's the negative, I'll attach it there, and then all those leads will attach to the top of this, the positive of this electrolytic. But there's like hardly any room, so I might need to get creative as far as where I place some things. We'll see. Alright, well, I guess I should film what I just did. So I have mostly recapped all of this, and that included getting a little bit creative with where I put these electrolytics. They all have to fit underneath here, and do all the shielding. You should probably keep them approximately where they were. I replaced also the high voltage capacitor that was coming off of the, what was that? That was one of those little spring mounts on the bottom that goes to the bottom cover. That's no big deal. Anyway, here's the high voltage cap that's replaced there, so I've got everything hooked up. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to hear anything because this is a loud power supply. Alright. Let's see. That did not compute. It does not seem to be turning on. Well, I finally got to figure out how to turn it on, but I've got some bad news. So that's the vibrator doing its thing. And we've got tube filaments, but I'm getting no B+. None whatsoever, so I'm not sure what in the chain is causing the breakdown, so I'm going to need to look at the schematic. It's probably going to be something coming off the rectifier. Looky here, I went over to the museum and found all this. I got all these extra vibrators and some speakers I can try out. Got a Magnavox. I don't know what that one in the middle is. Looks Japanese. One on the left is the original. But I grabbed 5 vibrators. Hopefully one of them will work, because I think what's happening is that the one that's in the set is failing and I'm not getting B+ as a result, because if you can't get past that vibrator, nothing's going to happen. So let's see what happens.
Comes to black people, they're afraid, quote unquote. We discuss how black skin is.
Dorian Williams to tackle, 2nd down and 9.
One of the biggest things that hurts you against a big guy like Christian Okoye, like Derrick Henry, is you can't arm tackle. There are backs you can bring down arm tackle.
Well, interesting thing just happened. I was getting kind of a comedy of errors. I was getting not much B+, and then I was getting some B+, and then I was getting poor reception, and then I just told myself, you know what, like, slow down, let's just go ahead and replace the rest of the capacitors, which I did. There were like 3 or 4 more that were in it, and one of them had a crack down the middle of it, and that was killing my B+ completely. So now that it's completely recapped,
10-yard penalty, replay, first down.
Rosengarten, the rookie, getting started right tackle tonight. But if you're John Harbaugh, you got to think the only thing that has slowed your team at all tonight has been self-inflicted penalties.
You know what? That's actually going to sound good in that car. I'll just have to make sure I put foam rubber padding or whatever so it doesn't rattle. I'm trying to decide what I want to do about the pilot lights. Maybe I'll just leave them alone. Or maybe I think I have some old school ones that are kind of orangish looking. I don't know. It's got these little green shade things that are made out of plastic in front of the lights, and I'm not sure if they just faded. Man, I'm glad that works. I could not get this to work for the longest time. Alright, so I flipped it over and decided to test the tubes in it. And it's interesting, surprise, surprise. The tube that was associated with the capacitor that I saw that had a crack in it is testing very weak. On my scale here, it's supposed to register a minimum of 40. It's measuring a little less than, well, a little over half of that, so that's not a very happy tube. So I have another replacement. So let's test the replacement just to make sure that it is indeed also good. Okay, let's wait for it to warm up. Horribly exciting waiting for tubes to warm up, as you know. Alright. Come on now, you can do it. Oh yeah, there she goes and climbing. Alright, huge difference. This tube is very happy. So, of course, in the most difficult to reach area, when the speaker's in there, it's going to be even more difficult to get at. So I'm just going to replace anything that's remotely weak, and we'll test it out again. All right. It's far more sensitive. This is the loudest power supply ever. But anyway, that's good, because it wasn't working before. And what I'm going to do next is add an audio input ability so that I can listen to whatever I want besides AM radio in the car.
Stars shining bright above you. Night breezes seem to whisper, I love you. Birds sing in the sycamore tree.
Dance all night, play all day, doing nothing, getting away. Dance all night, keep the beat. Don't worry, rise up, everybody rise up, rise up. Everybody rise up, rise up, and it's all night long. Now here's the dance, everyone can do.
It's a little distorted. I think because I have the volume on, then my phone turned up really loud. But, you know, I'm thinking that doesn't sound too bad, really. But that's all I'm going to do on it tonight. I think what I'm going to do, well, this is all I'm going to do on it electrically. I'm kind of worn out, actually. But what I am going to do, since I have the luxury of taking this big hunk of chrome into the house, I can clean it in the kitchen sink along with these chunks of chrome and everything and make them look real nice. And then tomorrow, I think what I'll do is I'll seal this back up and see if I've got power in the car. I sure hope I do. There's some loose cables hanging there. And get this thing installed. Alright, so I put the replacement speaker in here. That Magnavox speaker fit just fine, and it sounds good. And put the lid back on this. There's one thing I wasn't able to fix, or am afraid to fix, and it's the switch here. It won't fully engage, and it is, to me it looks like it's stamped. This whole assembly is like stamped together, so if I tried to take that apart, there's probably a way to do it, but I don't know how to do it at this moment, and I'm afraid if I did it, I would ruin it. So I'm going to run a little toggle wire or a little wire out the back, and there'll be a switch somewhere hidden away somewhere, like on under the dash or something, for the radio. I also put some LED lights. They're just bayonet bulb, 6-volt warm LED lights, and that way I don't have to worry about ever replacing those again, even though it seemed like the ones that came out of it, they're probably just as old. They're probably as old as the radio is, so who knows, maybe I'll put them back there someday. Maybe not. I've put the bottom back on, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the whole... The way the radio came is that the pilot lights and the radio are on separate circuits, and I'm guessing because the pilot lights would have used more power, or maybe it's because if you turn the interior lights on, you'd want to see where the radio station was before you turn the radio on. I'm not sure what the reason was. There's probably a very good reason. But since I've got these LEDs that use like nothing, I've tied the two commons together, and there is a connection to the ignition switch, and the wiring that's in the car that goes to it now has got a short in it, so I need to replace the wiring. This is going to be the replacement lead to the ignition switch. But let me try it one more time before I put the cover back on to make sure it still works.
SON News, I'm Jason Walker. The world of baseball.
This will set up third down and 8 to go. And then off the tackle for the Dolphins. Pretty good example, by the way, of how much 3 snap penalties make a difference, right? I mean,
That is very good. So I have a feeling that's what a lot of other folks do, and we're throwing away stuff that isn't bad yet.
Oh, absolutely. The average American is spending $1,000.
Let me try the audio input just to make sure that's working. I just want to make sure this works fine before I go through all this hassle of shoving it back in the car.
Last night I was dreaming about the H-bomb, where the bomber went off and died. I was the only man on the ground. There was 13 women and only one man in town. 13 women and only one man.
All right, well, that's working pretty good. So I'm going to put the cover back on, do a final radio test, because it's all going to be shielded. Seems like the more shielding I put on it, the better it gets, which is very important because it's in the steel car. So let's get those covers on. Final radio test, then it's time to install. Time to install. All right, it's all back together as far as the radio goes.
100 people are still unaccounted for.
It's hard to understand. I mean, this is just massive. The city of Asheville and the area around it has been largely cut off since Friday. Cell service is mostly out.
You guys up there in North Carolina, you all be careful. That is, I can always consider North Carolina to be my sister state where I grew up in Tennessee. So y'all please be careful out there. It's dangerous. All right, let's get some juice out of the car before I get too much further in this. Alrighty, so I did a test fire of the set in the car, and it does come on. But again, I have no way of turning the thing off. Right, as soon as I turn the car on, the radio turns on, which it's not the absolute end of the world, but I'd rather that not happen. So what I was doing, I was like looking for a place where I could easily mount something that would be inconspicuous but yet handy. So what I'm going to do is, before I put the radio back in, I'm going to drill a hole here and put a little toggle switch under there, because I don't want to mess up I really don't want to mess up this instrument cluster here. And then we'll do a final test and we'll shove it in there. By the way, I found this handy IKEA light. It's super handy about doing stuff like this.
Thoughts on the Niners at the 2-2 mark after one.
You know, this is actually pleasant to listen to. Like, really.
Just remember, darling, all the while.
genuinely nice to listen to. But let's give the radio a chance since we're outside and we got the engine going.
Be a vibe in the room, like nervousness or
We got the
edginess.
antenna fully
If
up.
you believe in this guy, it will be like nothing. Walked into that room.
About 4,000 feet elevation, an hour and a half. Utilize their award-winning AI to connect businesses with highly skilled
Going to war, most likely.
slash tech.
Maybe before any of us.
To inheritance tax. Remember, that rule is going to be changed.
Guess that's it. But that's
And there's some rules around that right now you need to be aware if you're
working pretty good. Anyway, the only thing is I had a 25 amp fuse in there. Oh, that's better. The one I had in there before was 25. And I upped it to 30 amps. That's just a little bit warm. I think I'm going to put a 50 amp in there. The gauge wiring's fine. That's not warm at all. It's just that fuse. Anyway, I'm going to put the car back in the garage. Oh yeah, another thing is that the wipers work. I just assumed they didn't. I mean, they don't work that great. Like, that needs to be taken care of, but the fact that they do anything is amazing. These blades are not blades anymore. They're completely rotten. So I need to figure out where you get these, because they're not going to be doing any... It's not like I'm going to be in a rainstorm in this thing anytime soon anyway.